The Baltimore Ravens bye week is officially in the books, and it went pretty well for them, all things considered. We talk about the biggest points for optimism and the biggest points of concern for the Ravens as they enter the final stretch of the 2023 season. All that and more coming up next year on this episode of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens. We're your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, and I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, thank you so much for being here and making Locked On Ravens your first listen each and every day. We're free and available on all podcasting platforms. That includes over in video form on YouTube and audio form wherever you get your podcast. So be sure to subscribe. It is free, and we do a bunch of great daily Ravens content over here. And here to talk about Ravens with me, I'm excited to have him back on the show. It's Cordell Woodland of 105.7 The Fan, the Winning Drive podcast. Cordell, it's been a while since we last talked, but the Ravens have put themselves in a good position over that time. They're 9-3. They enter their bye week in a great spot, and it's arguable that they ended it in a better spot than they were before.
Yeah, I mean, going into the bye week off a win always feels good. But for the Ravens, you know, with the way that the league is, I was about to say the AFC, but really the league really feels up for grabs right now. And I think that the Ravens probably have to feel good about themselves compared to the league right now. I mean, nobody is perfect. You know, nobody really looks like a juggernaut. You can probably make the argument that maybe San Francisco out of all the teams do, but and the Ravens played them down the stretch of the season. But in terms of the AFC, I feel like the AFC is wide open right now. So I do feel like the Ravens should feel good about that.
Yeah, and I mean, I think over the course of the Mahomes-Chiefs era, this might be the weakest offense now the defense is great, but the offense is, you know, where are the wide receivers? I think the Chiefs have they neglected that position. The Josh Allen Bills, they're not in the playoff picture right now. And then you talk about all the quarterback injuries that have happened over the course of the year. Lamar Jackson is the last quarterback standing in the AFC North at this point. So I think for the Ravens, and honestly, you look at the other playoff teams, Trevor Lawrence gets injured on Monday night, so we'll see what the diagnosis is for him. At the time of this recording, we don't know that yet. But it's really interesting because with the Ravens, you can argue that they're one of the most complete teams in the league, even with the inconsistencies we've seen on offense a little bit this season. But for me, Cordell, I think there are different parts of optimism that I feel really good about for this Ravens team down the stretch. If you had to pick one generally so far that you think, you know, I'm not concerned about that whatsoever, I think this is good, where would you say you're the most optimistic about this Ravens team this year as we head down the stretch?
Oh, it's got to be the defense. The defense has been the thing that's there every week, every game. They don't give up the big plays, especially through the air. That's the one thing that I think makes this defense championship quality, is the fact that you're almost surprised when teams do something that works against these guys. And for all the talk about the pass rush questions coming into the year, the Ravens have answered that easily. I mean, I think people get a little caught up in individual players. And granted, Justin Madubuike's having a great year. He's got 10 sacks right now. I don't think anybody saw him having 10 sacks. Probably expected him to have a really good year in a contract year, but this is at another level, and I'm sure that number is going to get even higher by the time the season ends. But I think people get caught up with the fact that the Ravens don't have not a Jadeveon Clowney. They do have a Jadeveon Clowney, but not a Myles Garrett or TJ Watt or, you know, or somebody like that. And I would just say clearly this is a team that rushes the quarterback as a unit, you know, as a total team. You've got blitzers all over the field, from Patrick Queen to Kyle Hamilton to Arthur Millette. Jadeveon Clowney and Kyle Van Noy have been godsends for this team. I think Travis Jones is having a good year, Dafe Owe as well. So I just look at them as a complete unit, and that secondary has been really, really good, despite having a lot of questions early in the season with Marlon Humphrey starting the year hurt. I think Brandon Stevens has played his way to the point, and I've been saying it for almost a month, maybe more now, I think he's the best corner on this team right now. And they are showing me that they believe it as well because of the responsibility that they have put on his plate. He's guarding guys like Jamar Chase, Keenan Allen. I mean, he's shadowing these guys. So I think Brandon Stevens has really been a big part, probably one of the many unspoken heroes on that team as to why the defense has been so good this year.
Yeah, and the listeners of Locked On Ravens, they're going to get tired of me saying it, Cordell, but I give Brandon Stevens props every time I can because of the way that he's been moved around over the course of his career. And, you can go back to college. He was a running back at UCLA and then moved the corner at SMU, but comes in, the Ravens move him to safety his first year. They move him back to corner his second year. They moved him back to safety this year, but then they had so many injuries, they had to put him at corner. And Marlon is still a heck of a player. And I think compliment to both him and Marlon how they've been looking. Marcus Peters was that number 2 option next to him. Obviously, no more Marcus Peters in Baltimore. Brandon Stevens has taken over that role. And I mean, look, the 2 Marlon Humphrey-less games this defense played against the Bengals, Brandon Stevens held Jamar Chase 7 receptions, 43 yards in that garbage time touchdown. So he's been amazing for him. But I think also you talked about the pass rush, which has been great. A reason for optimism for me is we talked for so many years in Baltimore about how this team can blitz, but they can't get pressure with 4 consistently. And that has changed this year with Matabike, as you talked about, because when this pass rush wins, they win hard. They're physical. Jadeveon Clowney's imposed his will, as you talked about. Kyle Van Noy comes in. For me, I'm optimistic about the pass rush. I mean, they're 1 sack away, I believe the number is, from breaking their 2022 sack total. So with 1 sack, they'll be tied for that. 47 so far this year, 48 last year. This pass rush has it going. And again, the secondary and the pass rush for every team works hand in hand. It's been a beautiful combination for Baltimore this year.
Yeah, it has. I mean, it really has. And a lot of credit has to go to Mike McDonald, defensive coordinator. I think he has coached his butt off this year. And I think it's something to be said about his scheme being so player friendly. I mean, I don't think it's a coincidence that Jadeveon Clowney jumps aboard this moving train and he looks like he's right at home. Kyle Van Noy, who comes in after the season has already started, instant impact. Let's not forget Roquan Smith at the trade deadline last year. Fit like a glove. I really believe that there's a spot for all of these guys to play some sort of role in Mike McDonald's defense. He does a great job of figuring out what guys do well, and he puts them in positions to succeed. And I tell you, that nickel blitz that they've been running all year, it's still in money. It's still in money right now. It's there whenever he wants to call it. Those guys are coming unblocked. And whatever he's doing, I don't know if it's the alignment, the way that the nickelback kind of hides behind the edge rusher, and the edge guy does a really good job of occupying that tackle out there to where the blitzer gets a free rush. But his schematics have been really good this year.
Yeah, and Kyle Hamilton, Arthur Millette, those guys they bring off the edge. He loves that. And I think for McDonald, he's still an aggressive coordinator. I think just because he doesn't blitz as much as Don Martindale did in Baltimore, he's not that live by the blitz, die by the blitz. Doesn't mean he's not aggressive in his own right. He is certainly an aggressive coordinator. He just does it in a different way, and it's been working for him this year. And I think it tells a lot when Mike McDonald was first hired on as a defensive coordinator. Patrick Queen took to Twitter and was ecstatic, and he's talked about how Mike McDonald is his guy, and he really helped him. And it's really, I think, rubbed off on all the players. They all love him, and definitely going to get some head coaching looks this offseason. We'll see if anything happens there, but he's a candidate, and he will be. I think he'll be a head coach someday, whether it's this offseason or another time in this league. But let's talk about the offense a little bit, Cordell, because to me, obviously with Lamar, there is always reason for optimism. They can hang with anybody when Lamar is there. But it's these young guys that have stepped up. Obviously, Zay Flowers has done his thing. I don't want to discredit what Odell has done coming back from the injury. Obviously, a rougher start to the year, but has really ramped up. I think that's what the Ravens wanted in the first place, honestly, just to get him in the spot where he can contribute now. Same thing with Rashad Bateman, both those guys going through early season injuries. But another young guy, Keaton Mitchell, has kind of stepped up to the plate here. He's been that electric bottle of lightning Mitch Queen, whatever you want to call him. He's been crazy. These electric rookies have really helped this offense move along, and we can talk about the inconsistencies. We'll get to that in the second part of the show. But offensively, it's the pieces they've surrounded Lamar with, because Lamar is electric. We know that, but we're also getting electric playmakers around him, which I think is great.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're seeing Lamar's game mature right now. I think a lot of people have wondered what Lamar's game would look like, as he becomes a veteran in this league. He can't run forever, right? And what is his game going to look like once his legs start to go away? And I don't think his legs are going away, even though we haven't gotten a lot of those splash run plays from Lamar this year. I think those are going to come as we get closer to the playoffs and into the playoffs. I think he'll start to lean on his legs a little more. But yeah, I mean, I think you're seeing Lamar start to trust the guys around him. And that's a credit to the Ravens for actually putting guys around him that he can trust. Odell Beckham, like you mentioned, I do think Odell's starting to heat up. I don't really put a lot of stock into that Chargers game. He goes into that game clearly dealing with the shoulder injury. It's the game before the bye week. I figured it'd be a light workload for him to try to get him a head start on some rest. But I think that they're going to lean on Odell, among others, down the stretch of the season. Keaton Mitchell, for sure, really coming onto the scene in training camp. And he surprised all of us that were out there for training camp this year. And even the people that watched him in preseason, you got to see just what that kid can do. And it's great to see that translate from practice and preseason on to regular season games, because that's tough. It's a lot of these guys that make plays in practice, but don't do it on Sundays. So you can't overlook that, the fact that Keaton Mitchell has made plays and has put himself in a position to actually get more opportunities. And Zay Flowers, of course. I mean, my only thing with Zay is I want more. I want more of Zay. I'm 5 catches for 25 yards, albeit he gets 2 touchdowns in the game, but that's not the stat line that Zay Flowers should be getting. I just think he's so dynamic and so explosive. They've got to find ways to kind of maximize his touches more than they have. Now
he scores the second one. Should he have gone down? I know the players wanted him to.
Honestly, I was okay with him scoring. They go up by 10 with a minute and a half left. The Chargers have 1 timeout. The game's over. I could hear defensive guys saying, maybe they don't want to go back out there. You don't want to run the risk of injury. Okay, I could buy that, but you could throw some backup. I mean, it's things that can be done. It's if you give up 10 points in a minute and a half, I don't know what to tell you. But also, that was such a rough game for the offense. The defense had played lights out for the entire game. I thought the offense needed that. They needed to hit on a home run play like that to ice the game. The defense had played too good for them to be put back out there at some point to have to defend the lead again. I wouldn't have been upset if he had gone down, but I'm also not going to complain that he scored. The kid he came into the game with 1 touchdown. He should have had more than that. He gets an opportunity to score 2 touchdowns in a game. He's going to take it.
Yeah, and now there's 2 touchdowns, first 2 in America for Zay Flowers, because the first one happened abroad. So exactly. he should have enjoyed it a little bit. And also, I mean, the way that the Ravens defense was playing, you're right, they go up by 2 possessions. The way the Chargers offense played all night, they weren't scoring twice on that Ravens defense. So I understand, though. I get both sides of it, but I'm another coaching moment, I guess, for Zay Flowers and how it all works out. Coming up in the second part of the show, we'll talk about where to be concerned for this Ravens team. With the optimism does come some concern points, so be sure to stay tuned. Plenty to talk about on Locked On Ravens. First, this episode is brought to you by Skylight. And holiday gifts this time of year, some can get boring, such as the generic socks, the candles, the slippers, the robes. But if you're looking for a meaningful gift this holiday season that your loved ones will actually use and enjoy, look no further than Skylight with the Skylight Frame. And the Skylight Frame is great. It's a touchscreen photo frame you can send photos to straight from your phone, and then they appear in seconds. You can even preload the photos before the box is open, so when it's unwrapped and plugged in, your most treasured memories will appear. And it's the perfect gift for everyone. So for grandparents, new parents, maybe for your spouse. It's a great group gift also because you can invite multiple friends and family members to share photos to the same frame. You can effortlessly send photos from photo to frame with the free Skylight app or unique email. And it's so easy to use. Setup takes less than 60 seconds. Plus the touchscreen makes it easy. You can swipe through photos, tap to see new photos, sent, and tap the heart. They also have a satisfaction guarantee, and they're confident that you'll love Skylight and They offer free 120-day returns, plus it's a top-rated brand, over 1 million happy customers, thousands of 5-star reviews, and available in over 30 countries, recommended by the Today Show, Forbes, New York Magazine, and more. There's a special limited time offer for our listeners. Get $15 off your purchase of a Skylight Frame when you go to skylightframe.com/lockedon. Again, to get $15 off your purchase of a Skylight Frame, just go to skylightframe.com/lockedon. That's SKYLIGHTFRAME.com/lockedon. We're back. Our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with Cordell Woodland. And Cordell, I know that this Ravens team is 9-3. They're tied for the top seed in the AFC. Miami currently holds that tiebreaker, though, due to conference record. But there are still a couple of points, some concern points I'd like to see the Ravens iron out. Hopefully they were able to iron them out over the course of the bye week. So I'll ask you the same question I did at the top of the first segment here, at the top of the second. If you had to pick one point of concern you want to see the Ravens get better at, maybe it's a player, maybe it's something within the scheme or any unit, where would you go right now?
Such a toss-up, because there are a couple of areas of concern for me, to be honest. But if I had to say the one that I'm most concerned about, it's probably the pass rush, because I'm sorry, not the pass rush, the pass blocking, the blocking on the offensive line. Because my other one was going to be hitting on more deep balls, hitting on some of those big plays. But I feel like the blocking goes hand in hand with that. You watch some of these plays, Lamar doesn't really have a lot of time to look to some of his down the field reads or to really set his feet to really throw an accurate ball, because, Ronnie Stanley's getting driven into his lap, or, Morgan Moses gives up a guy, or maybe John Simpson gets turned around. It's something, but Ronnie is the one that concerns me the most out of all those guys on the offensive line right now, just because he has a lot on his plate, right? He's the left tackle. He's the one guarding Lamar's blind side. He is paid to be the Ravens' best offensive lineman. And they have a gauntlet of a schedule coming up in itself, but they face a lot of great pass rushers. Aaron Donald can line up inside and out. Josh Allen is getting to the quarterback in a big way this year. You got Nick Bosa and Chase Young. Chase Young hasn't been that great this year, but Nick Bosa is still Nick Bosa, and Chase Young is still going to put pressure on you to have to block him, because he has such a high motor. And then TJ Watt at the end of the year, and not to mention all those guys out in Miami as well. So, I mean, that's the number one concern to me, because you don't want to get into too many times to where your quarterback is under so much pressure and he's taking hits, especially this time of year where it's cold and the ground feels like concrete. And we know how, the questions that have gone on surrounding Lamar around his health the last 2 seasons. It's usually come around this time of year. So that's the one thing that worries me the most. Can Ronnie Stanley, I don't expect Ronnie to all of a sudden show up and be an all-pro again, but can he be serviceable enough to where you can trust him to protect your franchise quarterback's blind side?
Yeah, and I know that, we see the Trevor Lawrence injury happen on Monday night, and there have been a few plays where Ronnie Stanley's gotten just bowled over and put on the ground and pushed back into Lamar's space. And a freak injury like that can happen, where it can be. I mean, we saw it with Joe Flacco years ago. Guy gets blocked into him and he tears his ACL off of it. So, again, you have to be able to protect Lamar at this point in the season. And you're right, their schedule, which we'll get to in the final part of the show more, they have vaunted pass rushers each and every week. I know, Miami lost Jalen Phillips. That's a big loss for them, but they still have guys out there, and you know what they do over there in Pittsburgh. They have their pass rushers. So it's key for them. But what do you do at this point with Ronnie Stanley, Cordell? Because I think with the money he's making, there have been conversations, if he doesn't play well in the next couple weeks, you should bench him for McCary. I just don't know if they do it with the money he has and what he's done for the organization.
Yeah, I don't think benching Ronnie is a realistic option. I mean, it sounds cool, right? People will say it in passing. Yeah, if he's not playing well, then you sit him for McCary. There's a reason McCary doesn't start. And it's not anything against McCary, but he has health issues of his own. The Ravens are trying to put this offensive line together in a sense to kind of protect Patrick McCary from himself. That's why they have viewed him as basically their sixth man, so to speak, because they don't believe he can handle the daily wear and tear of being a every week offensive lineman. And it is a step down going to Makari. It's a step down. I mean, I think Makari is serviceable, but it's not like we haven't seen him get bowled over when he's been in there. He's had the same issue. So the reality is all they can do is just hope Ronnie gets better. That's where they're at. I just really don't see a scenario where Ronnie's not playing unless he can't play.
Right. And I would agree with that, where, again, he's also been dealing with injuries pretty much the entire season. He gets injured in week 1, has to miss a couple games, comes back, gets injured again a couple weeks ago, has to miss a game, comes back. So, I mean, hopefully the bye week benefited him as much as anybody. I know Odell, you mentioned, was dealing with the shoulder thing. Hopefully it benefited him too. But you also mentioned the deep ball for Lamar. And it has been a concern point this year. His deep ball wasn't bad his first few years in the league. It was right around league average, but it's kind of dipped off these past couple of years. Last year was also a talking point. This year, we just have not seen them hit on that week 2 play in Cincinnati to Zay Flowers. You mentioned wanting more. I mean, that's exactly what you're talking about, having that play. How concerned are you that it hasn't developed? Because I thought at least we'd see an improvement over the course of the year so far. How big of a concern has it become for you?
A little concerning, just because at some point you would imagine that a defense is going to force them to try to go over the top. The Ravens all year have kind of eaten in that short to intermediate range in the pass game. And so I do wonder if a team dares them to take some shots. They've shown that they will take those. That's the good thing. They will throw it. And I think over the last couple of weeks, it's gotten better. I do think it's gotten better. There's been times to where the ball is I think it was the Thursday night game against the Bengals where it looked like one was going to fall right into the basket of Bateman, and the corner makes a great play at the last second and knock it away. He hits on a couple to Odell Beckham on that Thursday night game. Now, he overshoots Beckham on the Sunday night game against the Chargers, which is crazy because in practice, and this is one of those things I mentioned earlier, Lamar's talked about this as well. They hit on those deep shots in practice. I've seen them hit on those deep shots in practice. It's in the game, for whatever reason, it just doesn't happen. And I think pressure is a little bit of it as well. But I also I don't know. Some of it's Lamar undershooting guys. We've seen him throw interceptions, underthrowing guys at times. Sometimes he's overthrown guys. I've seen the ball go right through Zay Flowers' hands at times. It's a combination of everything. I don't think it's just one thing. But I do like the fact that Lamar has shown that he will take those shots if he sees Bateman in a one-on-one situation outside. If he sees not Rashad Bateman, but Odell Beckham or Zay Flowers in the slot where they can get that slot fade going down the field, he'll take those shots. It's just a matter of will they hit them at some point. And I just kind of have to hope that they will. Maybe not at the rate that we'd all like, but I think at some point they will. And I will caution people because I think people get caught up in their own team a lot. I see every time Lamar and those guys don't connect on a deep shot, Ravens fans are kind of like hitting the fire alarms. But look, it happens all over the place. I mean, we just watched the Chiefs and they've struggled to hit on deep shots. And they've got arguably the best quarterback in the league, in my opinion. So it just happens. It's not an easy completion to make. Some teams make it look easier than it is. But in all actuality, it's a low percentage play. It's a low percentage play. The Ravens do have to hit on it more than they have, though. I will admit that.
I think the prettiest deep ball I've seen Lamar throw this year went right through the arms of Keaton Mitchell, right through the hands, right in the back of the end zone. Yeah. And it was a heck of a play. I mean, he put it right over the shoulder. I think it was a linebacker, right over the shoulder of the linebacker into the breadbasket, and it just goes to, maybe Keaton didn't see the ball because the linebacker was kind of draped all over him. But there have been some plays where Lamar has put the ball right there, and whether it goes through the hands, and that Steelers game, I mean, we can talk about it. He had a couple of beautiful deep shots in that game, and they were all dropped by the wide receivers. So it's not just Lamar, but I do agree Lamar does have to be more consistent with it, but it's not only a Lamar Jackson thing is what I'll say there. Coming up, though, in the final part of the show, we'll get into one more point of optimism and a point of concern. It's a tied into togetherness one there, and we'll talk about the final stretch of the year, so be sure to stay tuned, plenty to get to on the show. First, this episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, and if you're looking for daily fantasy sports, of course, you don't have to look any further than PrizePicks. PrizePicks is so much fun. It's the most fun so many have had it, up to 25 times their money this football season. All you have to do is select 2 or more players, pick more or less in their projected stats, and place your entry. And the basketball season is here. It's in full swing now, and you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League created specifically for combo projections and include 2 or more players from different sports or leagues. For example, if you're a LeBron James fan, you can pick LeBron James and Travis Kelce to 10.5 combo of 3-pointers made plus receptions. Plus, if you want to play alongside some of PrizePicks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz, you can now find the community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries from some of the biggest names in the PrizePicks community each week. Plus, PrizePicks offers a really awesome reboot policy, so your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. PrizePicks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. Go to PrizePicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, that's PrizePicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks, daily fantasy sports made easy. And this episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. And as the weather gets colder, the NFL offers stay hot over on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. And if you've been thinking about joining FanDuel for a while, there's no better time to get in on the action than right now. The app is super easy to use, and there's a wide range of betting options that includes spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. Maybe you picked the Ravens parlay in week 13. There was no game for the Ravens, but they had a great bye week. So maybe you picked the Steelers to lose, the Browns to lose, the Chiefs to lose, and the Jaguars to lose. That would have won you a bunch of money over on FanDuel. Plus, the Ravens coming back in week 14 to play the Rams. So there are going to be plenty of great offers and options over on FanDuel. So visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. We're back rounding out Locked On Ravens with Cordell Woodland. I am Kevin Ostreicher. And Cordell, I think I've seen a lot of optimism and a lot of concern with this last point I'm going to ask you about. It's the coaching for the Ravens. We've seen it both ways. Some people are very excited about it. Obviously, I think Mike Macdonald kind of spearheads that excitement. But then there's some concern with a lot of people in the fan base with John Harbaugh, how he's managed some games this year. Now, look, John Harbaugh is a player's coach. The players love him. He has his guys ready to play most of the time. I think we've seen a couple times this year where he hasn't. But then there's Todd Monken, who I think the offense looks worlds better with him as opposed to what it did with Greg Roman, but there have been inconsistencies on offense. Is the coaching for you more of a point of optimism or more of a point of concern as we head down the stretch?
That's a good one. I'll say optimism because look, at the end of the day, John Harbaugh is a Super Bowl winning coach. He's got his team at 9-3. More times than not, when they're healthy, the Ravens are viewed as an elite team in the AFC. So I'm going to be optimistic on John Harbaugh. Sure, he's had his moments this year that he'd like to have back. But that I just, again, this is one of those moments like how I mentioned with the deep ball. I think fans, when it's happening to their team, it's like everything's crashing down. But if you really look at it around the league, nobody's perfect. Andy Reid's got his issues. Nick Sirianni's got his issues. I mean, it doesn't matter where you go. Kyle Shanahan's got his issues. For as great of a coach as he's been, he's struggled to get over the hump, so to speak. So, I mean, everybody has their thing. And at the end of the day, there's no upgrade for John Harbaugh right now. I don't think there's a better coach out there for the Ravens than John Harbaugh. He still has that locker room's air. They still respect him. And I do agree with you. I think more times than not, he gets his guys ready to play. Them not finishing games is an issue. It's an issue. And it's not just a player's issue. It's a coaching issue too, as well. And I think it's between the ears for all of them. I think they get into the back end of the game and it starts to creep in like, like, let's not blow this. And it may be subconscious, but I think that's something that they do have to get over. But yeah, I think John Harbaugh more times than not does put his team in a position to succeed. The coordinators are the reason you really feel optimistic, specifically Mike Macdonald. Like you mentioned, Mike Macdonald, I've yet to see him really get out coached this year. To be honest with you, I am a little worried about the run defense a little bit, just because it hasn't really been tested this year. And when it has, it doesn't always look good. The Ravens have been fortunate to where they've been playing with the lead pretty much all year. So teams are quick to abandon the run against them and try to throw the ball. And we know how that hasn't worked for teams. But you look at some of the games where teams have committed to the run. You look at that Browns game. They committed to the run all game, worked out for them. You look at the Cardinals game, even though the Ravens ended up winning, the Cardinals were running the ball pretty much at will. The Bengals, I feel like, constantly let the Ravens off the hook by going away from Joe Mixon. But when you look at it, when Mixon does run the ball, he does pretty well. So that'd be my only area of concern for the defense, especially as you get into the postseason and teams will run the ball more. But I love Mike Macdonald and everything he's done this year. I just think he's always a step ahead of the opposing team's coordinators. And Todd Monken, I think Monken is still figuring it out. I really do. I think he's still figuring it out. I think he's still trying to get in a groove in terms of his play call sequencing, what works for certain guys, how to still work in new ways to get guys open, especially with no Mark Andrews there. The offense has got to be a little different. I think Todd, you see times to where you can clearly tell he's in a groove with his play call. And it's like it's coming like popcorn. And then it's times where it's just head scratching, just like, what was that? Why call this play in that moment? Why have this personnel out there at this moment? So I think he's really just still trying to figure this team out. But I would say there's more reason for optimism than concern with that coaching staff.
Yeah, to your point about the run defense, this is the best pass defense in the league in terms of net yards per attempt, but in terms of rushing defense, they're 22nd. Mm-hmm. So they've had some big plays put on them on the ground for sure. And you're right, they have been playing with the lead for pretty much the whole year. So we'll see how it works out. But I think for me, coaching is also more of a point of optimism. There is concern about, okay, there have been some mistakes throughout the year from John Harbaugh, not communicating with Zay Flowers in the Colts game, which ultimately cost them. And those drops, I mean, you got to get your guys ready. But again, it's not John Harbaugh's not out there catching passes. He's not out there making tackles. So I always say it's a group effort, players, coaches, execution, coaching. So that's where I am with that. But the final stretch, Cordell, we've talked about it over the course of the show, mentioning it here and there. Toughest schedule in the league over the last 5 games. You got the Rams coming to M&T Bank Stadium in week 14. Then you got a couple of primetime games. They got these back-to-back primetime games this year. Jaguars in week 15, 49ers a Christmas night game in week 16. Then you got the Dolphins and the Steelers to round things out at home. It's going to be tough for them. And again, I think we're going to learn a lot about them in these last 5 weeks, because not that they haven't played anybody this year, but the offenses they have played, I mean, that Rams game that they have coming up is going to be a little bit of a test for them. I think they're not the best offense in the league, but they're a sneaky offense. But Seattle was a great win for them. That's a good team, and they blew them out. Detroit was a great win. That's a good team. They blew them out. But they also have had their fair share of backup quarterbacks they've played and offenses that weren't hitting on all cylinders, which, again, doesn't mean the defense is not elite. They're the best defense in the league. But I think we're going to see over the course of these last 5 games just who this Ravens team really is. And I'm excited for it because I think they can prove a lot.
No, I agree. I think you're definitely going to see what this team is made of, because they've been able to play this season comfortably, right? Like I mentioned, they've had the lead pretty much all year. And even in the games that they lost a game this year without ever trailing, that's just how it's been for them. They've blown leads, but I'm curious to see what this Ravens team looks like when they're in a slobber knocker, when they're in a back and forth game, when it's a game where the defense isn't playing that well. Can the offense show up? Can the offense come back? And I think that'll be tested. You look at that stretch against the Niners, that stretch against the Dolphins, even that last game of the season against Pittsburgh. That game may not be for the division, but I think it'll be for something, if not just for Pittsburgh's playoff hopes, the Ravens seeding, maybe fighting for the 1 seed still. And I still look at this Rams game as a potential sleeper. I really would not sleep on this Rams team that's playing their best football right now. And that is an offense that's starting to click a little bit. And this is an offense that I think will challenge them in ways that some of the other offenses weren't really able to. This Rams offense, they'll push the ball vertically. They're really good in play action. They get the ball to not only their running backs in the pass game, but they've got 2 receivers in Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp that can beat you all over the field. And Tutu Atwell is the guy that defenses fall asleep on. He's the big play guy. The Ravens have been so good about not giving up down the field plays. I'm just curious to see how that'll go this week against the Rams, because I think on both sides of the ball, the Rams present a unique challenge. The Ravens are still the better team. I'm picking them to win, but it's just a team that you cannot sleep on.
Yeah, I think, well, Tutu's that Louisville connection for Lamar, so there's that there. But again, we know this Ravens team, what they do, and every team does it, but the Ravens do it, is they play up to competition and they play down to competition. So it's been both ways for them, and we've seen that kind of rear its head both ways this year. So it's going to be key for them. And I think a lot of people are circling that San Francisco game, and rightfully so. It's a potential Super Bowl matchup. But the biggest game of the year for them, if everything keeps going the way it is probably going to be Miami to get that head-to-head tiebreaker over them. And with that, if with the Jaguars' loss, their path to the number 1 seed gets a little easier, but they still have to take care of their business and hopefully get through the 5-week stretch and obviously the playoffs healthy. But it takes a historic collapse for them not to win the division, not to be in the conversation for the 1 seed. And they've put themselves in a good spot because they won early, which means there's not as much stress of, hey, are we going to make the playoffs? What's this going to be? They still are in a great position here. But Cordell, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for hopping on. Please tell people where they can find you and what you're working on here.
Yeah, man. Appreciate you having me. Always love talking some football with you. You can definitely follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Cordell Woodland. You can catch my show Shaking It Up Sports on 105.7 The Fan by downloading the Odyssey app. My show is on weeknights on The Fan. And also I do the Win and Drive podcast with Rita Hubbard. You can catch that podcast wherever you get your podcast from.
And all that work will be in the description below. Cordell does a lot. He's also he covers the Orioles too. Yeah. So we're getting back into baseball season soon here. We got a couple months to go, but it's an exciting time in Baltimore, and hopefully this Ravens team will be able to string together some wins as they look for that number 1 seed. But Cordell, I appreciate you again. Thanks so much for hopping on, and thank you for tuning in to Locked On Ravens today. Be sure to subscribe, video form, audio form, the whole 9 yards. Coming up tomorrow, we'll be previewing that Ravens Week 14 game against the Rams and a lot more. So be sure to stay tuned. We'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.